Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, December 30th, 2022. The last time I'll call the 2022 number, at least in new shows. I guess you'll hear reruns at some point. And this will all go out the window. All right, well, never mind all of that. Pretty soon we'll be double-checking ourselves and calling 2023, making jokes about how we're writing our checks, etc., etc. And before that, saying see you next year at the end of the show, I guess. I don't know. We'll see whether I remember to do that one. It's the last Friday of everything. It's the last Friday of December, last Friday of the year. Last Friday ever? I don't know. Whatever. We'll think of some reason why it's special, and then it'll all go out the window when we come back on Monday, and we start the grind all over again. Lots to catch up with today, lots to catch up with from days prior. We'll probably dive into some of the longer reads today and maybe sift through some of the transcripts as everyone else is doing this work and attempting to catch up with all of the material that's been released. I do have to start. Yes, John Shiflett already on the case. Thanks, John, and for following along. There is George Santos news. We can't avoid it. They have a nice story here in the Washington Post on the tiny paper, I guess, but they'll say it in headline. The headline reads, "A tiny paper broke the George Santos scandal, but no one paid attention." I had to figure that had been done somewhere. And there certainly were some local reporters who said, we reported on this stuff. It's just that nobody cared. And then there was the article we read that his Democratic opponent, Robert Zimmerman, said we tried to make hay out of it and just didn't get anywhere with it. And some of that is probably on the newsrooms and some of that may be on his messaging. I don't know. But interesting. And we'll take a look at this piece in just a little bit. I guess the Twitter and social media and Mastodon chatter the day comes from events last night in which internet influencer and male chauvinist pig Andrew Tate. Have we ever mentioned his name on the air before? I've heard his name before, having heard it from high schoolers. Report on dumb jerks on the internet who have large followings who really shouldn't. And apparently this guy, you've probably read a quick backgrounder on him in the last 12 to 20 hours because the news was all over the place. The guy is, I guess, a former kickboxer and mixed martial arts kind of guy. So I think that he shares that background in common with Joe Rogan, which kind of tells you where we're going with all this. So he's another guy who figured out that he was good at fighting and can beat people up, and so decided that his path through life would be about intimidating other people, and the easiest to intimidate were women. And so he then sold himself as hey, you can get whatever you want in life by following me and using my advice, which you'll pay me for. And I'll tell you, women are stupid and you can beat them up and you can force them to do anything you want and nobody can stop you because if they try to, you can beat them up. Plus you'll be super rich because here's a bunch of ways to cheat. So you should be rich and a jerk and violent and then you'll get whatever you want. I think his thing was he was teaching people to have the guerrilla mentality, which is to say not have much of a mentality at all, but rather to, thrash things and, live like an animal, but with a lot of money. Anyway, so that's what he was up to somehow. He also ran something called Hustlers University, which is basically the Trump University for young jerkasses like this who wanted to envision themselves as tough guys who could beat up anybody, get any woman, and make lots of money without worrying about the ethics of it all. Anyway, somewhere along the line, he decided that Romania was the place he needed to be in order to live this lifestyle. So he went there. The news, it boils down to this. He somehow got himself in a Twitter fight with Greta Thunberg, which I guess was, in a sense, is inevitable, given who the two of them are. I don't know how it started. It hardly matters. But I did see something where it first came to my attention where Tate is sending pictures of himself gassing up one of his apparently 33 supercars, I guess you would. I don't know if they're all supercars, but he's gassing up a Bugatti somewhere and attempting to taunt Greta with the fact that he's burning so much gasoline because he's got 33 cars or whatever, and whatever. And I don't know why that was interesting to her, but he sent her a thing and said, like, give me your email address and I'll, tell you the truth about global warming, which is that, whatever. I read something on the internet and now you have to read it too because he's going to mansplain everything. I guess I can say also he's running about 34, 35 years old now. Greta Thunberg, I guess, is 17, 18, 19 at this point. I don't remember. She became famous, I think, at like 16. It's been a couple of years, so 19. And, trolling the 19-year-old girls. But, that's something that doesn't bother him. He's not worried about the optics of that because he's selling a misogynist brand. So he thought that would be hilarious. And she, responded in a way that, okay, it was funny. I mean, it wasn't the most hilarious thing in the world. But everybody had a good laugh at it because, well, you want to be on her side versus his side. And it was kind of funny. And, basically making fun of the compensation he was probably making for his imagined physical inadequacies, which are probably something that would bother him tremendously given who he is, by having all of these cars. And I guess, so he then released a video. He produced a video in response to her response to his trolling, in which he's sitting at a, desk in a dungeon or something somewhere in his man cave crash pad place, I guess, in Romania. And it's just what you would think. Like, okay, the guy has somehow, through various swindles and grifts, apparently millions of dollars at his disposal. So what he does with it is he buys 33 Bugattis, every cool poster of a chick in a bikini and samurai swords and guns, and puts them in a, windowless dungeon of a house in Romania. Well, all right, not that, funny, not that far removed from, say, Count Dracula. But Count Dracula, the predation on young women, the mysterious wealth, the dungeon-like abode, the Romanian thing. But I don't know. Somehow it was said that Dracula had class. But anyway, I digress. So he videos himself. He's in a silk robe and smoking a cigar. What are all the most offensive things that I can do in this video? So then I don't know what he said, but in 2 minutes or so, he videos how he doesn't really care about what Greta Thunberg says anyway, and screw her and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, the actual news that comes out of it is by that night, by which I mean last night, the news is that Romanian authorities have arrested Andrew Tate on sex trafficking charges, essentially, claiming that he's running an organized crime gang there in Romania, which he may very well be doing. And then the rumor starts, and I say rumor now because this is starting to clear up, that he had inadvertently included in the shot of his video a pizza box from a local pizza delivery place that I guess clearly identifies that he is in fact in Romania, and pretty much where in Romania he is. It's a local joint, I guess. And authorities were able to point to that and say, well, he is here. I guess there'd been some question as to his whereabouts. And he was in fact wanted in connection with this investigation into sex trafficking. And they went to his house and raided the place and seized all the cars and guns and arrested him. So that seems like a good, fun ending until it was all ruined for us by the probably pretty clear thinking of Ben Dreyfuss. And you know, what can you do? But he put together something on whatever his, you know, personal blog is. Is it a Substack? Is it I don't know. It doesn't matter. But it's over at Calm Down Ben, where I guess he blogs about stuff in the news that requires him to calm down. I don't really know. Anyway, Romanian cops did not, he says, find Andrew Tate because of his Greta Thunberg video. So I guess we're all supposed to stop saying that now. This is a very cautious piece, but I guess I'll catch you up to speed on it because everyone's talking about it. And you too may have started the morning thinking, oh, well, of course Andrew Tate was arrested on sex trafficking charges because of a erroneously and unwisely included shot of a pizza box. Although I did see somebody made a good comment on Mastodon about it, saying that having allegedly millions of dollars at your disposal and yet, living in a fabulous mansion, maybe sort of in Romania or whatever, but still eating what amounts to Domino's crappy pizza. Sorry, guys, they're not sponsors or anything, but Domino's crappy pizza is the most, white bro thing ever, and it really was. Described it pretty well. But it doesn't matter that he wasn't found because of the pizza box. That did seem a little unlikely now in hindsight, now that somebody's making the claim that that wasn't it. Anyway, this, Ben says, is a lesson in media failure and misinformation, and he is labeling the whole thing false, scrawling the word false in red lettering over a screenshot of the pop bass tweet. The reading, Andrew Tate's video in response to Greta Thunberg allowed Romanian authorities to confirm he was in the country and arrest him in human trafficking investigations due to the pizza chain shown in the, I don't know, something's written over, but the pizza box that you see there. Well, all right, apparently not the case. Romanian authorities have, though, detained far-right misogynist internet troll Andrew Tate yesterday, on allegations related to sex trafficking. As I understand it, at least the first rumors were that he was keeping women there, including one American citizen, as it turns out, and that's even worse for reasons. But keeping some women there against their will and, forcing them to do God knows what on the internet, I think, perhaps pornography related. And, good, arrest him. And I don't know what Romanian prison's like, but I guess he's finding out, and it's probably a terrible place. And, they should improve conditions somewhat, but not for him. Anyway, who is Andrew Tate? Ben sort of rises above this. It doesn't really matter. He's a bad guy. He might be a bad guy who was innocent of those awful allegations since he hasn't been convicted of anything, but he's still one of those pickup artist types who thinks date rape is a myth. That's really what you need to know about him. He used to be a kickboxer, but then apparently transitioned into, and if you put yourself in a position to be raped, you must bear some responsibility, internet influencer role. See, that's the kind of guy he is. This led to him getting kicked off all the reputable social networks a few years ago, and then, a few weeks back, Elon Musk did a general amnesty for banned Twitter accounts, and he came back. He immediately started tweeting stuff like this. So this is his grand return to Twitter. He tweets to no one in particular. You are poor. You are unimportant. Men do not fear you. Your woman disagrees with you. Your lives are crap, we'll say. If I was forced to endure a year of your life, it would be the worst level of depression imaginable. Which I guess just means he's not a very mentally tough kind of a guy. I would put it that way. And I also would guess that enduring a year or any time really in Romanian jail is probably no great shakes either. But we'll see how mentally tough he is afterwards. On Wednesday night, he got into a Twitter fight with Greta Thunberg, the young European climate activist who, I guess to be fair, this is correct, who had a viral moment a few years ago. She makes a good speech since then. But anyway, Thunberg is not known for her sense of humor, so when she dunked on Tate, it went viral. This brings us to today, when Tate and his brother were taken into custody in Romania. I'm avoiding, he says, look how careful he's being. I'm avoiding using the word arrest because it isn't used in the primary Romanian news report on which all of the other American news stories are based. I don't know anything about the Romanian judicial system, but it does sound like he was arrested. He was brought out of his home in cuffs, but detained or taken into custody seems safest. It's probably just a translation thing, but I'm erring on the side of caution since this is a post about how American reporters get some Romanian news wrong. All right. Fair enough, and another good warning. As if this weren't already a nice little package of good versus evil for social media, this afternoon reports began to spread that Thunberg was actually instrumental in Tate's detainment. Yesterday, after Thunberg dunked on him on Twitter, Tate released a response video. In that video, there is a pizza box in the frame. According to news reports in the United States, that pizza box was from a Romanian pizza joint, and its presence in the video confirmed his location to Romanian authorities who had been waiting for a chance to catch him. I don't know why he was so difficult to catch. He drives around Romania in Bugattis, 33 of them. So, see a Bugatti, arrest the guy inside. You could probably do that. I don't know, Romanian law. Maybe they're really into civil liberties there since their post-Soviet days, but who knows? I would imagine that they could probably get away with stopping any Bugatti in Romania and checking to see whether it's Andrew Tate, and if it's not, be on your way. Sorry, Count Dracula. Good to see you again. Anyway, this is a social media goldmine. Can you say these things? I think so, right? I think you can get away with this on TV now. They say, bad dickhead gets into fight with courageous teen climate hero, accidentally reveals location, ends up in prison. I know it's a compelling story because when I read it in the Daily Beast, I tweeted it, and here is his tweet about it. So bad, man. Pickup artist / alleged kidnapping sex trafficker kicked off old Twitter, brought back when Musk amnestied all the accounts, gets in fight with Greta Thunberg, during which he accidentally reveals his location, tipping off Romanian authorities. There's a picture of him in cuffs, and the masked Romanian gendarmerie, I guess, because I'm looking at though. Yeah, they really do write that. You know how they write police on their tactical uniforms, and I guess in Romanian, Jandarmeria is with a J in front is how they spell it. Anyway, then Ben goes on. I guess he kept tweeting last night. Anyway, it's an argument for not deplatforming bad accounts. I guess he's being a free speech absolutist here. Let them post their way to prison. It's pretty rare that you get lucky that way with it. Assuming this fellow is guilty and gets convicted and goes to prison, it seems like Greta Thunberg and Elon Musk both deserve some credit for that. That's a buddy cop pairing for you. In a video rant he uploaded to Twitter, the Daily Beast wrote, in which he smoked a cigar and tried to brush off the online spat, he unwittingly displayed a pizza box from a local pizza chain, alerting authorities looking for him to his presence in the country. Then a Twitter follower asked me, Ben, why I believed that, and I somewhat rudely dismissed him. His theory, and I guess it's good to rudely dismiss this dumb theory, but the underlying point shouldn't have been so rudely dismissed, Ben says. His theory was that this was a plant by Thunberg's PR team to make her look good. I think she's looking okay without it, but anyway, then his tweet here, his embedded tweet, maybe this reporting will turn out to be inaccurate, but if that happens, this will not be why. And here's the exchange with Warbo, Warrbo, in which he says, what reason is there to believe this version of the story? Dreyfus says, I don't know. Someone in Romania reported it. Maybe it's false, but I bet Romanian reporters have, sources with your Romanian police, so I don't have reason to dismiss it. And Warbo says, I bet rich people's PR staff have sources in the Romanian police too. And this has all the feels of constructed, as Greg would say.
Bullshit.
Right. Anyway, I bet they know he was going to be arrested and have successfully scripted this as cross-marketing with Greta's publishers, among others involved. Like Cardi B somehow gets in this. And Ben, I think quite correctly, responds here. You think that Greta Thunberg and Elon Musk were given a heads up by the Romanian police, and then one or both of them used their PR teams and paid someone in Romanian law enforcement to lie about how they secured the arrest? All of this happened in the span of 20 hours? That's your theory? That's unlikely. And as he says, that theory is dumb because it involves a pretty elaborate conspiracy, but it did make me more curious about the element of the article, and though there is no conspiracy behind it, it is, he says, well...
That's bullshit.
That's what he says. It's total BS. And here, again, there's too many, like, embedded tweets here. Just report what happened, man. Or just show us the thread reader. He tweets an update. It's not a conspiracy, but Greta being responsible for the arrest is BS. So all these places reporting it are just aggregating speculation that began with this Twitter account jumping to a conclusion based on one line in a Romanian report. And I guess he includes a screenshot and link to which Twitter report it really is. Maybe he discusses it in the narrative, because I don't want to jump right back into it. No Romanian journalist reported that the cops found him because of a pizza box in his reply to Greta Thunberg, but there are lots of stories in the U.S. and Britain claiming that. Why? Well, they're all basically citing each other. But if you dig through the citations, you eventually come to the Daily Star, which cites an American Twitter account. According to Alejandra Caraballo, a writer and clinical instructor posting on Twitter, Romanian authorities needed proof that Andrew Tate was in the country, so they reportedly used his social media posts. That Twitter account makes the claim. It is here. Here's Alejandra writing, Romanian authorities needed proof, right? So he used his social media post. His ridiculous video yesterday featured a pizza from a Romanian chain, Jerry's Pizza, confirming he was in the country. This is absolutely epic. I wouldn't have guessed that Romanian pizza joints were called Jerry's Pizza, but I guess they're trying to make them American sounding. And then another one from Alejandra, not only did Greta Thunberg destroy Andrew Tate with her tweet, she made him so angry he inadvertently tipped off Romanian authorities to his presence in Romania with his lame comeback video. Greta is an absolute legend. And then another one, thank you for confirming via your pizza that you are presently in Romania. The Romanian authorities were curious, and I do agree, as she's quoting what Greta Thunberg tweeted at him the day before. You have, as she says, and I still think you can get away with this one on TV, small dick energy. I guess they're letting that one go these days. All right. So its source, Alejandra's source here, Alejandra, is a Romanian newspaper article that Ben, links to above. It does not say that at all. At least not in the Google translated English version, and that might not be accurate either. I'm sure he would acknowledge. But that version reads, sources close to the investigation stated for Gandul, maybe that's the paper, that shortly after the completion of the computer expertise, this is some bad translation, remember, the authorities waited for the right moment to catch the Tate brothers, who were always out of the country. After seeing, including on social networks, that they were together in Romania, the prosecutors mobilized the special troops of the gendarmerie and descended by force on their villa in Pipera, maybe Pipera, but also at other addresses. Now, unless Google is missing some Romanian language nuance, and that could always be the case, this sentence does not say that the police were tipped off by a social media post to his whereabouts, let alone that it was by his video with Greta Thunberg. It says they confirmed it in multiple ways, at least some of which involved social media. This makes sense if you think about it for 5 seconds. Andrew Tate owns a house in Romania. It was searched earlier this year, and there's a link to the story about it, as part of a related investigation into sex trafficking. Like other countries in the world, I imagine Romanian police know how to check credit card purchases and flight records and train passenger manifests, and they probably knew when Tate was in Romania. I have to agree with that. And I'm not even certain that he didn't give it away the night before when he was showing pictures of himself gassing up his car. If he was at a Romanian gas station, I guess they would have figured that out. But it does say that they did also use social media in some way to confirm his location. The Twitter account suggests that necessarily means that they used the pizza box in the video to locate him, but he's a prolific poster to social media. Just a few days ago, he tweeted a video of Romania, and that ought to do it. And then pictures of himself. He just captioned Romania. Here's one that says, me and my castle, which may or may not be where he actually lives. Anyway, None of this makes Andrew Tate a good person. He's a very bad person. If he is guilty of the heinous things he's alleged to have done, he deserves to spend decades in a Romanian prison. And if he's not guilty of doing those things, he's still a terrible person who deserves to be shunned by the rest of society. But I honestly couldn't give a about Andrew Tate, a random schmuck I had never heard of until yesterday. He's not an important character in a television show of the world which I watch. Maybe he is on other people's. Probably he is in his victims, but I wouldn't bother writing this much about some random bad man from some other country who sounds like he's getting what he deserves. However, an important character in a TV show I do watch is the U.S. media. I am prone to defending journalists when they F up because I'm a journalist, or at least I was, and I know how easy it is to F up, and I guess I still have some sympathy there because these writers were on a deadline and moving fast, but it doesn't take a lot of work to see that this Greta angle, which is tantalizingly clicky, is BS. It took me 8 minutes or so on my iPad, and you could do it faster, I'm sure, on a laptop. And like thousands of people online who read about this today, my initial instinct wasn't to dig into it. It was to take the Daily Beast's word for it. Only prompted by a follower with a conspiracy theory did I think to look further, and that's how misinformation spreads. It's not all nefarious. It's not all disinformation. It's, well, something happened in Romania, and someone speculates some nonsense on Twitter that goes viral, and you don't speak Romanian, so you're limited to by your ability to do as much due diligence as you want, and your boss is telling you, tick-tock, publish the post. Maybe you hedge and cite reports. These reports don't really exist, but they might appear to exist if you look at your Twitter feed, and then you publish your post and you create your report. Even with the hedge, it makes some editor at some other publication yell tick-tock even louder to their reporter, who feels more comfortable publishing their version because you've already done so, and so on and so on and so on. And everyone else, they already want to believe this because this is so perfect in an Aristotelian dramatic sense. All right, there's more. I can't believe it, though.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. There was only just one paragraph of Ben Dreyfuss's lengthy exposition on this left, but I think it's an important one. As you can see, the real importance of this story is to talk about the use of social media to spread a viral story that isn't exactly true, and then the sort of great global game of telephone happens. Things get worse and worse. Happens all the time. Nobody particularly at fault, and doesn't really require there be a malicious actor in all of this. But a good reminder, we'll say, if he's right. I mean, even if he's not right, it's a pretty good reminder about how these things go down. So like he said, maybe, you don't speak Romanian, you can't do all the due diligence you want, you rely on a Google translator. Maybe he's relied on a Google translator that's just wrong, and there is plenty of mention or something that hints at the pizza box that just isn't picked up in the nuance, and that's acknowledged. But, then somebody else has to write it up. Daily Beast has to cover it because it's happening on the internet. Then someone else has to cover it because the Daily Beast is covering it, etc., etc. And, he concludes, by the time someone in Romania publishes a story about what actually happened, this rampant, unfounded speculation has already been repeated endlessly on the other side of the world. We know that part of the story. This, I think, is very interesting and insightful and true, and it will inspire memes and arguments. To be fluent in the culture war, you'll have to be fluent in the fiction, right? I've already retweeted a couple of things this morning, even after reading this, which, though they aren't explicitly based on the fiction part of it, are part of the, I guess what you might call the greater culture war. Somebody, made a funny comment, then someone turned it into a meme and put an official meme that has that official typeface over, superimposed over a picture, therefore making it a meme. But the fun comment was, the guy's bragging about his supercars and everything. I have 33 cars. You got 33 cars and you couldn't get away, right? No escape for you. You're trapped in a Romanian castle. Your own doing. Very funny. They make it into a meme, and you won't know what the hell that meme means unless you know this story. But you will not have heard this story without having heard the fiction as well. You don't need the fiction to make this meme work, but you get the idea. It will inspire memes and arguments. To be fluent in the culture war, you'll have to be fluent in the fiction. And one day, when you're old and aged and gray, it will come up somehow, and you'll Google it and find out it wasn't true and think, And then as the light dims out and you shuffle off this mortal coil, you'll wonder, I wonder what else I was wrong about. And then you'll die and your television show will end. But since you didn't get an answer, it will end the way no television show wants to end, with a cliffhanger. Okay. So, that's a little dramatic at the end, but okay. Very interesting and I thought worth sharing, and yet very time consuming. So, what about the other things I meant to tell you about that were real and impact more lives because the players involved are supposed to actually be meaningful people in the world? George Santos. he's supposed to be a meaningful person in the world because he's going to be a member of Congress. Remember that. Even though he shouldn't be, he will be. Sarah Ellison writes this new one in the Washington Post about the tiny paper that broke the George Santos scandal, but to which no one paid any attention. Months before, the New York Times, the local newspaper, published a December article suggesting Representative-elect George Santos, Republican of New York, had fabricated much of his resume and biography. A tiny publication on Long Island was ringing alarm bells about its local candidate. And I guess you'll get to see why no one was listening. Anyway, the North Shore Leader. Have you ever heard of it? Probably not. And actually, you learn a little bit about it in passing in the reports. They don't pass judgment on the whole thing, but if you really kind of think about this and read between the lines, you'll see, this is why you would never be paying attention to these guys. You'll see it as it comes up. The North Shore Leader wrote in September, when few others were covering Santos, about his, quote, inexplicable rise in reported net worth from essentially nothing in 2020 to as much as $11 million 2 years later. The story noted other oddities about the self-described gay Trump supporter with Jewish heritage, who would go on to flip New York's 3rd congressional district from blue to red and is now under investigation by authorities for misrepresenting his background to voters. I don't know if that's exactly what he's under investigation for. I don't know if that's actually a crime, so I don't know, but we'll get some clarification on that in days to come. Interestingly, Santos shows no U.S. real property in his financial disclosure, although he has repeatedly claimed to own a, quote, mansion in Oyster Bay Cove on Tiffany Road and, quote, a mansion in the Hamptons on Dune Road. Managing editor of the North Shore Leader, managing editor Maureen Daly, wrote in the Leader, for a man of such alleged wealth, campaign records show that Santos and his husband live in a rented apartment in an attached row house in Queens. Row house, that's a new word for it. Okay. The Leader reluctantly endorsed Santos's Democratic opponent the next month. Reluctantly. Okay. Tip, right? This newspaper would like to endorse a Republican, it wrote. Well, why is that? What kind of statement is that to make? But Santos is so bizarre, unprincipled, and sketchy that we cannot. He boasts like an insecure child. Have you anyone heard of any Republicans lately that do things like that? But he's most likely just a fabulist, a fake. It was the stuff national headlines are supposed to be built on. A hyperlocal outlet like the Leader does the legwork. Regional papers verify and amplify the story, and before long, an emerging political scandal is being broadcast coast to coast. But that system, which has atrophied for decades amid the destruction of news economies, they want to make this about that, okay, and I don't disagree, appears to have failed completely this time. Despite a well-heeled and well-connected readership, the Leader's publisher says it counts among its subscribers, for instance, I guess I've emphasized this wrongly. Despite a well-heeled and well-connected readership, like I guess, i.e., the Leader's publisher says it counts among its subscribers Fox News host Sean Hannity and Jesse Waters and several senior people at Newsday, a once mighty Long Island-based tabloid that has won 19 Pulitzers. No one followed its story before Election Day. And I guess now the unstated part of this story begins to take shape. How did this get ignored? But a local mini paper, a hyper-local newspaper actually did cover this, and no one was paying any attention. Now you're starting to see, wait a second, this paper would like to endorse a Republican. What kind of statement is that for a paper to make? So it counts among its readership, well, Sean Hannity and Jesse Waters and several senior people at Newsday, which is, increasingly right-leaning in its own right. So I guess it's like, well, why are only Republicans reading this paper? Well, North Shore, it tends to be a ritzy area, so maybe it's a little more Republican-leaning. But those are some, major league Republicans. But then you might start asking yourself, well, or not asking, but explaining to yourself and say, oh, well, maybe this does make sense. The local paper run by Republicans, they are at least doing us the service of actually covering the story. Though they want to endorse a Republican, which is pretty biased, they can't do it because they say this guy's a scumbag. Now, who should be reading this? Allegedly, Sean Hannity and Jesse Waters are reading this paper. Now, that could be a lie, which would be funny in its own right, or it could be true, and well, guess what's happening here? They report that the local Republican candidate is a total fraud, and golly, Sean Hannity and Jesse Waters read it because they definitely read this newspaper, and it's definitely right-leaning, and it's right up their alley, and it's their local paper, but no interest in the story. How did this happen? How did it happen? And nobody paid any attention. Oh, it's one tiny paper with a tiny circulation that mostly, I guess, goes to rich a-holes in the North Shore of Long Island who have Fox News shows. And wow, they're not interested in the story. Well, that's a lot easier to believe than we published it just generally and circulated it to the general populace and nobody cared. Somebody would care. Not Republicans, but some other people. But I guess there's the problem. They weren't really circulating to other people. When Santos apologized for embellishing my resume in a New York Post interview published Monday, he also vowed to serve out his term as a U.S. congressman. Okay. Local news doesn't get much more local than the Leader. A weekly published and primarily run by Grant Lally, L-A-L-L-Y, an attorney whose parents bought it in the late 1990s. By which I mean the paper. It's not that they both died in the 1990s. They both bought it in surfing accidents. Anyway, most of the newspaper's staff works part-time and holds down other jobs to pay the bills, which may be because it's only a weekly, or it may be because it's a Republican paper, so they're not going to pay anybody anything. Anyway, nobody can survive on local papers alone, Lally said in an interview. What else does Lally do? Remember, he's an attorney, and he just happens to own it. Why does he own it? Because he bought it? No, his parents bought it. It's very Republican. I mean, that's the way property law works in this country, but it's pretty Republican. Anyway, Lally was particularly well prepared to cover the race for New York's 3rd. He had run for the seat himself in 1994, 1996, and again in 2014. A lifelong Republican. What do you know? Lally was George W. Bush's floor manager in Miami during the 2000 presidential election recount. What a great guy. Already we love him, right? Now it's starting to take shape and make some sense. The Leader's staff, which includes students and retirees, are all steeped in the largely wealthy local communities on the North Shore of Long Island, which gives them access to local political gossip. We can boil that down very quickly, said Lally. And again, all right, so I think this part can be put aside now. I mean, we do understand, and it does shed some light on it. It's a Republican paper run by Republican operatives and read by Republican operatives, and they reported on the George Santos story, which, good for them. They agreed to report on it. That shows some integrity, I guess, as a journalist. The readers, on the other hand, said, okay, scandal, but it's not my job to report it. Let somebody else do it. And that's how the thing dies. Maybe that's why the system doesn't work. It may have something to do with, the starvation of local news resources. That does feel like an important story and through line, but that may not be the reason that this happened here. So it's a little bit, I'm Ben Dreyfusing this story a little bit. A few years ago, Lally said he went to lunch with Santos, who was there soliciting support for his political career. Right from the start, there was something off with him, he recalled. Santos told Lally that his family was from Belgium. Years later, Lally said he watched Santos on the campaign trail talking about his grandparents who had fled the Holocaust from Ukraine. It was just a flagrant, blatant concoction, Lally said. Then, of course, it later turns out that they also didn't flee Ukraine. So, anyway, Lally has stayed in touch with his former staffers from his congressional campaigns, who would sometimes call him to gossip about local elections over the spring and summer. You wouldn't believe what we are seeing about Santos, Lally recalled being told on some of those calls. One tip came from a local home builder who said he had driven Santos around Long Island to look at mansions the candidate claimed to own and wanted to renovate. But Santos wouldn't let the builder inside any of the homes, Lally said. He claimed he had tenants there that prevented them from entering. Another call came from a state senator who said a house in the Hamptons that Santos claimed to own was worth far less than the candidate said and was owned by someone else anyway. These tips helped inform the leader's reporting and its editorial, which were deeply skeptical of Santos's claims of sudden riches. We expected it to pop a lot more than it did, Lally said. For one, he thought that Santos's opponent, Robert Zimmerman, would have made more of the leader's endorsement and pushed the contradictions his newspaper uncovered into larger publications such as Newsday and the New York Times. Zimmerman told the Post that there were many red flags that were brought to the attention of many folks in the media, but that frankly, a lot of folks in the media are saying they didn't have the personnel, time, or money to delve further into the story. This experience has shown me just how important it is for everyone to support local media. Maybe. I mean, why didn't the New York Times do it? I don't know. Kim Como, a spokeswoman for Newsday, did not answer specific questions about the paper's coverage of Santos, but said in a statement, "We are continuing to cover the Santos story every day." And so am I. So who cares? I mean, they're Newsday. They should do better. It's possible that the leader's reporting fell into a void, in part because there are fewer papers to cover the news than in the past. The number of journalists has declined by 60% since 2005, according to government statistics. Research from the Medill School of Journalism at Northwestern University this year found that on average 2 newspapers are disappearing in the U.S. every week. The nation has lost more than a quarter of its newspapers since 2005 and is on track to lose 1/3 by 2025. There are now more than 1,600 counties with only one newspaper, typically a weekly. Local journalists are kind of like having beat cops walking the street, said Tim Franklin, Senior Associate Dean and Professor at the Medill School. Just as good beat cops can help keep a neighborhood safer, the presence of local journalists helped keep our politics more honest and our government more accountable. Maybe. I mean, sounds good. Franklin predicts that if we don't fix the crisis in local news, we're going to see more George Santos-type cases and instances of politicians going unchecked. Santos and his representatives did not respond to requests for comment. And that's the end of that article, and they're probably right. I don't know if it all has to do with the loss of local news, but you will probably see more George Santos-type cases and politicians going unchecked. I would put Murdery Trader Green in that category. I think that her rise could have been stopped in her first election if people had, if more people locally and nationally had known how she was conducting her campaign. I think that was a major oversight. You may recall that her Democratic opponent ended up having to flee the state mid-election and attempt to withdraw, but they wouldn't take his name off the ballot. It was too late, but he had been basically harassed, intimidated, and threatened until he finally had to up and leave the state. That's actually probably worth looking at, but golly, there's just no local newspapers to do it, I guess. All right. Well, let's see. A couple other items in here that are tops on the list that might pay to bring up. Let's see. How about this one? This is another angle on, well, everything in the world. Before we get to hopefully some more reading of the transcripts that were released by the January 6th committee. But I want to take a brief break for Michael Waldman's piece, no relation there, at the Brennan Center for Justice's website. That is, I guess, in circulation again, though it's an older piece, actually from April of this year, but I guess being recirculated in light of, I think actually in light of the George Santos news that he was at least partially funded perhaps by Russian oligarchs and, introducing foreign money into our election system again. And so this gets circulated again. And with good reason. The title being Obama Was Right About Citizens United. And you might have forgotten about this, but this will all come quickly back to mind. The Supreme Court's 2010 decision has opened the door to foreign money in U.S. elections. That's the subheader here. And now the narrative. In January of 2010, just days after the Supreme Court ruled in Citizens United, President Obama stood before Congress to deliver the State of the Union address. Now you're starting to remember this, right? 6 justices sat berobed in a front row. With all due deference to separation of powers, he scolded, the decision, quote, will open the floodgates for special interests, including foreign corporations, to spend without limit in our elections. As lawmakers applauded, Justice Samuel Alito angrily shook his head. Able lip readers noted he was saying, not true. I do remember that moment. Well, it's been 12 years. That's enough time, by the way, to find WMD in Iraq, right? It's been 12 years. A recent fine levied by the Federal Election Commission suggests that Obama was right and that court rulings and administrative paralysis have made our elections ever more vulnerable. Canadian steel tycoon Barry Zeckelman, and we've heard nothing about this really, and this is a relatively minor case, I think. Which means the reason the FEC is taking it up is because it's a relatively minor case. The major cases that the news has broken and the facts are all over the front page, the FEC don't do nothing about it. I'm still getting Long Island-y about it, I guess, but the FEC won't act on those because they'll just deadlock along partisan lines. But if it's locking up or finding a Canadian steel tycoon, they can still find Republican votes for that. He's Canadian. Anyway, Barry Zeckelman, he's that tycoon. He's agreed to pay $975,000 to the FEC after steering corporate donations to a pro-Trump super PAC in violation of a federal prohibition on foreign influence in U.S. elections. Super PACs can receive unlimited funds, including from corporations, if the group's spending is done, quote, and that's a real scare quote there, independently of the candidate it supports. This would have been illegal before Citizens United. Typically, Zeckelman's largesse would have gone unnoticed and unpunished, but he was invited to dine with the president at Trump Hotel in thanks for his gift. And while there, he inveigled for 8 minutes, urging Trump to tighten tariffs against his competitors. Other table mates included 2 shady businessmen working with Rudy Giuliani. The conversation was recorded, and released as part of the impeachment proceedings in 2019. That's Trump's first impeachment, the one where he tried to extort Vladimir Zelensky into smearing Joe Biden in exchange for military aid against Russia. The insurrection was the second impeachment. Thank you for the explanation. When the New York Times contacted the Canadian businessman about the recording, he admitted he participated in the decision to donate to the super PAC. Federal law clearly forbids foreign nationals from engaging in such conversations, all of which led to the recent fine. The billionaire will barely notice the dent in his bank account, of course. Apparently, the FEC will also let him ask the super PAC to return the money he gave. So that'll be nice for him. He'll get that part of that back. Aptly, the meal took place at the Trump Hotel, jammed as it was with fixers, lobbyists, and fundraisers. That's the world the Supreme Court made. Campaign spending essentially has been deregulated. The law is in tatters. The Federal Election Commission is weak, deadlocked, and barely able to act. The Freedom to Vote John Lewis Act would address some of this by ending dark money in elections and requiring full disclosure of campaign spending. It passed the House and has a Senate majority, as did an earlier bill just focused on campaign finance, but was killed by a Republican filibuster, this time aided, as we know all too well, by Senators Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. The recent bill was best known for its protection of voting rights. That's understandable, as the big lie of a stolen, quote-unquote stolen 2020 presidential election continues to sweep the states, threaten voters of color, and undermine integrity. It can be easy to forget how new and destructive the current world of campaign cash can be as well. Only occasionally do we learn about the deals cut, the tax loopholes claimed, and the favors traded. Polls show voters are savvy and angry. Corruption remains a sleeper issue in American politics. The campaign reform provisions were among the most popular in the recent bills, popular with Republicans and Democrats alike. A previous Republican president identified the stakes. At an earlier moment of corruption and reform, President Theodore Roosevelt vowed, sooner or later, unless there is a readjustment, there will come a riotous, wicked, murderous day of atonement. Wow. Now that's a tweet for the ages. And that's the wrap up on the story, but it's quite correct to point out, yeah, there was that moment where Obama pretty clearly, I think like a lot of people, pretty clearly saw, I don't see how this won't end up opening up the door for foreign influence in American elections. Alito probably was saying, no, that's not true because you still can't donate as a foreign entity, but Citizens United made it possible to establish the mechanisms that make it possible to launder donations so easily that, of course, foreign money would start flooding in. And for him to sit there and shake his head, not true. And only 12 years later be completely wrong about it. But, nothing you can do about it. Lifetime appointment. But a good point and well worth at least a few minutes of discussion on a Friday, I would say. Let's see. Other things that we can get into before the start of the break. Gosh, I don't know if there's any way we can really finish them up, but why don't we start in on the Amanda Marcotte piece I mentioned yesterday in Salon about Carrie Lake and what she means for the future of the party. Carrie Lake's, quote, forever coup, that's an interesting term, is what the future looks like until we start to see real consequences. That's an interesting point. You'll get it right away. As long as the money flows and legal sanctions don't, Trump and his allies see no reason to quit. That sums up the latest in court for Carrie Lake. One thing seems certain. Carrie Lake is not giving up. The big lie-spouting GOP candidate for Arizona's governor's seat lost another frivolous lawsuit challenging her loss over the weekend. Lake just kept posting through it, though, crowing about how the people want justice and that she will keep up the fight against her loss in the courts. She even tweeted a conspiracy theory early Monday, accusing the judge of letting left-wing attorneys ghostwrite his opinion for him. Around the same time, election officials and the Democrat who won the election, Governor-elect Katie Hobbs, filed a request that the court formally sanction Lake for her relentless abuse of the courts. Enough really is enough, the request reads. It is past time to end unfounded attacks on elections and unwarranted accusations against elections officials. The move was celebrated by democracy proponents who believe, correctly, that insurrectionists like Lake and her mentor, Donald Trump, will continue to launch attacks on democracy unless they start to face real consequences. Lake's stubbornness has been alarming, in no small part because she appears to be doing this mainly to curry favor with Trump. Even if she doesn't succeed in convincing a court to just hand her the lost election, her quest will only help boost Trump's mood and stiffen his spine for what is widely expected to be another attempt at stealing the White House in 2024. This is why it's so troubling that the judge declined to sanction Lake late on Tuesday, claiming that the lawsuit was not, quote, brought in bad faith. This lack of legal consequences emboldened Lake immediately. She let loose a storm of social media posts promising she won't back down to tyrants, and she's seeing this through. And here are some of those tweets embedded in the piece. The judge's claim to believe that Lake's lawsuit was filed in good faith is, frankly, a bit hard to swallow, and not just because she deleted false accusations about the judge in an apparent effort to avoid sanctions. The case itself was a total clown show. As Kate Riga of Talking Points Memo reported, Lake's lawyers didn't seem to know the basics of arguing in court. They tried to call a witness who wasn't on the witness list and introduce an audio clip as evidence that had not been verified in any way. The lawyers for Lake leaned heavily on conspiracy theories that the actual expert witness called by the Maricopa County lawyers punched right through. If the judge is reluctant to sanction the plaintiff, that's understandable. The concern is always that such things could have a chilling effect on lawsuits brought by legitimate whistleblowers. In the before Trump times, in fact, it would always be better to see a judge err on the side of letting things get hashed out in court. But Lake's yeehaw response, complete with a bad meme of her hanging out with Steve, when does he serve his sentence again, Bannon, is an ugly reminder that going easy on coup plotters will be read as an invitation for them to keep trying until they succeed. Few have read much of the full report released by the House Committee to investigate the events of January 6th, and myself among them, of course, which was released right before the Christmas holiday, which really didn't make it all that easy to do. But even a minor amount of engagement is a chilling reminder of how Trump and his allies have no compunction about doing whatever it takes to get and maintain power, mostly because they don't fear the consequences for trying. If I do this, what do I have to lose? Trump was reported as saying to top Justice Department officials during the efforts to overturn the results of the 2020 election. Aha, right? Okay, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show. Let's continue with reading through Amanda Marcotte's take on what Kari Lake is up to. I think, as usual, she makes important points beyond the headlines of what's going on here. According to the new report, that's the January 6th committee report, Trump's legal mastermind behind the coup plot, John Eastman, knew what he and Trump were plotting was illegal. Eastman had been pushing this idea that then Vice President Mike Pence had the exclusive authority and sole discretion to throw out any electoral votes he wished. This idea excited Representative Louis Gohmert so much that he offered to sue Pence in order to force him to throw out the votes for Joe Biden. Eastman objected to the lawsuit, the report explains, because there was a very high risk that the court would issue an opinion stating that Pence has no authority to reject the Biden certified ballots. So instead, Eastman repeatedly suggested that the best strategy would be to go forward with the plot to steal the election and let the courts sort it through later. As University of Alabama law professor Joyce Vance told Chris Hayes of MSNBC on Tuesday night, it's easier to beg for forgiveness than to ask for permission. He knew that if he asked for permission in advance, he would be told no. Trump and his allies obviously thought the entire effort to steal the election was a can't-lose proposition. If they succeeded, they would hold on to power, and there would be no chance of consequences. But even if they failed, the bet was that it was too much trouble for federal law enforcement to hold them accountable for trying. 2 years later, that gamble is paying off nicely. The political and logistical headaches for holding Trump or any of the other high-level coup plotters accountable have indeed prevented Attorney General Merrick Garland from arresting any of them. That's why the January 6th committee went out of its way to make criminal referrals for Trump and Eastman. As Representative Benny Thompson of Mississippi said, the only thing that will stop Trump's future attempts is accountability that can only be found in the criminal justice system. This really is a why not keep trying situation for Trump and his allies. Call it a forever coup, with some part of the larger plan to seize power always in motion. They don't lack resources, for one thing. On the contrary, the forever coup is quite profitable. As the January 6th report shows, the big lie has opened the spigot for an unprecedented amount of political donations, with much of it from small-dollar donors who were promised their money would, quote, stop the steal. Mostly, however, the money went to fund the former president's other endeavors and to enrich his associates. Lake's never-ending efforts to steal the Arizona election look to be more of the same. Her Save Arizona fund is steadily raising money. There's even an option to become a monthly donor, hinting at the indefinite nature of this attempted coup. Trump may seem a little down these days, in part because the midterm election did shut down his main pathway to stealing the 2024 election, but he's running again, and there's little reason to believe that he and his allies won't return to brainstorming shiny new ways to take a run at another coup effort. The odds of there being no downside to trying don't seem to have changed much. The money keeps flowing. The criminal referrals were headline-grabbing, but they have no power to make Garland do anything. While the midterms were a disappointment, it's also a fair bet that the public's efforts to resist Trump's machinations are limited by time and energy. With nothing but money and time on their side, people like Lake and Trump are smart to believe that success may just be a matter of outlasting their opponents. The only thing that could change the equation is prison, or machine guns. But prison is the preferred option in this country. But without that threat, there is literally nothing to keep Trump and Lake and other insurrectionists from chipping away at democracy until it's gone. And after all, I'm thinking of government-sanctioned machine guns anyway. So, or quasi-sanctioned, a la Ceausescu. Anyhow, a good point. There's really no reason for them to stop at this point. There's been no accountability serious enough to make them worry. So, anywho. All right. Well, let's see. I have two choices for directions to go for excerpts and highlights of the transcript released by the January 6th committee. One, the Politico piece, which I think probably was pretty widely read by Kyle Cheney, because he does a pretty good job promoting himself on Twitter. So it's highly likely that people will have read through some of those. It's also highly likely that he will be covering a lot of the same highlights. The same things would be interesting to him as were interesting to, who's got it here? John Shiflett had passed this along to me earlier, along with the suggestion that I read the abbreviated pundit roundup for the year, which, that one, I don't know if we'll have time to get through to that. And that's really Greg's gig anyway. And I know it looks like you were expecting to hear him today, but Fridays are an off day for him. It's a good idea. It ought to be an off day for me too, but there's so much to catch up on. I always feel obligated to come and do a Friday show, not only because, it's a weekday. People are working. Maybe they want to be kept company, but there's so many stories that need reading and long form stuff that needs the decks to be cleared. Not that I get right to it in the beginning. Anyway, but yeah, John picked up on this too, that Brandy Buckman, right? Okay, at Daily Kos has been busy reading the January 6th transcripts, and there is available this report on it. The January 6th committee releases 19, get rid of these pop-ups, witness transcripts, including interviews with Trump Jr. and Ray Epps. Okay. Are these likewise covered in Politico? Maybe we'll find out. Let me take her take on it first, because it's Daily Kos. That's got to be a lot more fun and close to home than Kyle Cheney and Politico, right? So we take a look. All right. The January 6th committee published 19 transcripts on Thursday, adding to a growing list of records it has already released to supplement its final report unwinding the attack at the U.S. Capitol and former President Donald Trump's attempt to overturn the results of the 2020 election. Transcripts released on Thursday include interviews with, ready? Christina Bobb, the Trump campaign attorney, and then she also got herself mixed up in the Pervalago documents case too, right? David Bowditch, former deputy director of the FBI, Muriel Bowser, the mayor of Washington, D.C., Taylor Budowich, Trump spokesman, Robert Conti III, chief of the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department, Ray Epps, ex-U.S. Marine, former president of the Arizona Oath Keepers, Ruby Freeman, the election worker from Georgia, harassed by the former president's supporters and election fraud conspiracy theorists, Stephanie Grisham, the former White House press secretary, Alyssa Farah Griffin, former White House director of strategic communications. I saw Greg tweeting a thread about someone's analysis of her transcript around today, too. I think I may have marked that one. Kimberly Guilfoyle, former advisor to Trump, spouse to Donald Trump Jr., Chris Hodgson, former director of legislative affairs to former Vice President Mike Pence, Doug Mastriano, the former Pennsylvania state senator, failed gubernatorial candidate for Pennsylvania, Ryan McCarthy, former Secretary of the U.S. Army, Christopher Miller, former acting Secretary of Defense, Stephen Miller, bald a-hole, Wandrea Arche Moss, election worker from Georgia, another one, the other one, harassed by former president's supporters and election fraud conspiracy theorists and extremists, Mark Robinson, retired D.C. Metropolitan Police Department Sergeant, Stephen Sund, former U.S. Capitol Police Chief, and Donald Trump Jr., former President Donald Trump's eldest son, and executive vice president of the Trump Organization, in case you didn't know who he was. What we got here is highlights and recaps. It is titled thus and begins with Ray Epps. Epps, a former U.S. Marine and one-time leader of the Oath Keepers chapter in Arizona, met with the committee voluntarily on January 21st, 2022, and in November of 2021. The transcript released on Thursday is from his January interview. Epps came to Washington on January 6th and was filmed at the Capitol, but was never arrested. He has admitted to directing people toward the Capitol after Trump's speech. Historically, Epps has told reporters he believes he was never arrested because he contacted the FBI promptly after his name first started circulating in FBI alerts about the siege. Phone records, according to the New York Times, have corroborated this account, and Epps has maintained that video of him purportedly, quote, urging people to storm the Capitol is actually footage of him attempting to calm rioters. Epps entered the building briefly, but spent most of his time on restricted grounds outside. Epps became a touchstone for January 6th conspiracy theorists who argued that he was a deep state plant and a member of the FBI who helped orchestrate the Capitol attack. Those conspiracy theories were spurred by right-wing extremists as well as mainstream talking heads on Fox News and among Republican members of Congress. Former President Donald Trump name-dropped Epps at a rally and intensified unfounded theories about Epps being a part of a false flag mission attacking the Capitol. Epps claims to have endured multiple death threats since then. Per the transcript, Epps addressed some of the claims against him head-on. He told members of the committee that he has never worked for the FBI, never spoke to law enforcement at the FBI or elsewhere when he arrived in Washington, D.C. on January 4th. He did, however, have an interaction with far-right streamer and January 6th defendant and reported white supremacist Antheme Giannette. Well, we know him better as Baked Alaska. That guy's name, I know. Giannette, who live-streamed himself storming the Capitol on January 6th, has accused Epps of being part of the deep state, because why not? Epps told investigators on the night of January 5th he was out trying to protect law enforcement from people, namely Antifa. When he came upon Baked Alaska, Epps said Giannette was trying to incite violence on the police, trying to get other people involved, and he meant to stop it. I guess this taken from the transcript. There was a few megaphones there, people trying to, there was somebody screaming about, what's that guy's name? Screaming about one guy and then somebody else screaming about Antifa. F Antifa and all that kind of stuff. And then people wanting to fight with BLM and just like, I can't believe this is going on. Are these Trump supporters? And what it was, I don't believe they were Trump supporters. I believe they were trying to get Trump supporters to back their cause. So I tried to de-escalate it. I went over to the gentleman. Well, he's not a gentleman, Epps said. I went over to the guy that calls himself Baked Alaska and had words with him, and that this was not what we're about. We need to stay focused. You guys are not right. You shouldn't be doing this with police. He was saying the police broke their oath, calling them all kinds of names and stuff. And I'm sure you can go their body cams and find everything I was saying. Oh yeah, I'm sure. Anyway. On the 6th, January 6th, that is, Epps testified that he tried to convince multiple people to protest peacefully, but failed when up against the ones with megaphones and cameras who were trying to drive a different narrative and trying to suck people in. Epps admits he told people to go to the Capitol. It was his vision, he said, to get as many people as possible to surround it, to be there, to let them know we're not happy with what has happened. And that was it, he said. No violence, he added. Epps said, or has said, that he left the area around the Capitol before any violence broke out. They used violence to enter our Capitol, violence and breaking windows, and then you're filmed inside of it, so you didn't leave before there was violence. Boom, case closed. Anyway, I wasn't aware of any of that until later on and seeing it on the news like everyone else. That's not law-abiding, and we're law-abiding people. Without law, it's anarchy. It's not good. Without government, there's anarchy. It's not good. Any government is better than no government, Epps testified. He attended Trump's speech at the Ellipse, but before it began, he had already begun telling attendees to go to the Capitol after Trump's remarks were over. The idea to march there was organic, he said. It was not. It was pretty common knowledge that everybody was going to go to the Capitol. I was just trying to help it out, Epps testified. No one told him to instruct the crowd either, he said. He and others who had problems with the outcome of the 2020 election simply thought it was important that our elected officials know that we had a problem with the election. Trump had just begun his speech around noon when Epps and others started walking toward the Capitol. He left his adult son, who had traveled with him to D.C., at the rally at the Ellipse. Epps ended up in front of the crowd and told investigators he assumed that the Capitol would be open and welcoming and warm. He nor his son were dressed for the cold weather, he testified. Most of the people already at the Capitol when he arrived were not your grandmas and your grandpas, he said. Not us fat guys, Epps told investigators. Most of them, people there at the time, were in their mid-20s and early 30s, he said. Some were wearing identical clothing like khakis and orange caps. This outfit was common to Proud Boys in Washington on January 6th. Many of those around him, he said, were people he recognized from the night before who had eagerly riled up rally-goers. There ended up being a lot of those people and others in a rage on January 6th, Epps said. It's almost like they were in a rage the whole time, like they were losing their minds. I didn't understand it, but that's what was going on. They definitely had an agenda, he said. Epps said he tried to convince a man sporting a backward cap to stop pulling at police barriers and knocking cops to their feet. Once people got beyond the fencing, Epps said he kept going forward toward the west side of the Capitol with them in hopes of talking them down. Yeah, right. Those plans started to falter as the chaos around him increased. At that point, I wasn't trying to de-escalate. I was in the crowd. I was trying to figure out what I was going to do, he told the committee. Coming upon police, Epps said he began talking to them and protesters as they clashed. Body cam footage reviewed by the select committee shows Epps saying, "We made our point," to the other rioters. Epps said he meant to convince those rioting to stop the, quote, mess. It was no longer his aim to enter the Capitol, and he wanted to prevent others from doing the same since everything had spun out of control. He couldn't recall how long he tried to de-escalate at that point, but once rioters got inside, he followed. A couple steps in, looking around and smelling the tear gas, he felt sick. As he began to leave, he testified he heard calls for a medic. Epps was once trained as an EMT, he said. and he was getting ready to do CPR on someone who had collapsed near him. A medic with experience appeared beside them, and within minutes, Epps and the medic pulled the collapsed person through the crowd and found a spot near a tree to prop them up against. I looked back. I saw people crawling all over the Capitol, climbing the walls. It made me kind of ill to my stomach. I decided to go back to there was no point. It had gone beyond what I wanted it to be, he said. Epps further testified that he did not talk to anyone at the FBI, CIA, or NSA on the 7th. The panel had Epps go down a list of his phone calls from January 5th through the 7th and affirm the identity of each person he called or who called him. Incoming and outgoing calls were to family members and work associates. After the insurrection, Epps learned that he was on an FBI alert list from his brother-in-law. His brother-in-law found a picture of him on Twitter and shared it with his wife on January 8th. Epps immediately called the FBI. Well, I wanted to straighten them out and let them know what happened, he said. He was on the phone for an hour, and when he hung up, he had no idea what would happen next. Text records obtained by the committee shows Epps sought out a lawyer on January 12th, and he sent a letter the same day to the FBI's field office in Phoenix. He wanted to cooperate with the FBI, he wrote. He finally met with agents in March, with his attorneys in tow. There were no documents to produce, he said, but he answered all their questions. His son was interviewed by the FBI in April, and at that time turned over a series of photographs that he took on January 6th. The claim that he was part of a false flag or party to a conspiracy to attack the Capitol are claims peddled by grifters who want to push this garbage to make themselves more successful, Epps said. Or, on the other hand, to further them in a political career, he told the Select Committee. These claims against him have ruined several aspects of his life, he said. There's been serious death threats. He was advised by his attorney not to speak out publicly about the conspiracy theories, so he didn't, he said. Not speaking made it worse and led people to believe he must be guilty, he said. We had a tour bus come by our home and our business with all these whacked out people in it. There are good people out there that was in Washington. Those aren't the people that's coming by my house. This attracts when they do this sort of thing, this attracts all the crazies out there. We've got one guy that has been in prison and shot by police once, and he's out on bail right now, and he's trying to contact me, Epps testified. Though Trump name-dropped him at a rally and made his life more difficult, Epps also blamed Representative Thomas Massie and the right-wing outlet Revolver. I mean, it's real crazy stuff, and he brought that kind of stuff to the floor of the House. When that happened, it just blew up. It just got really, really bad. Him and, Representative Matt Gaetz and murdery Trader Green. And, yeah, they're just blowing this thing up. So it got really difficult after that. The crazies started coming out of the woodwork, he said. The attention wasn't limited to Epps alone. His attorney, John Blischak, who sat by his side during the panel's more than hour-long interview, revealed that when hysteria around Epps hit a fever pitch, he received threatening calls too. Okay, that's not so much a summary as a retelling of the entire transcript, I would think. Well, who's up next? Donald Trump Jr., and he has a pretty extensive section as well, and I think it's probably worth it. David Bodowich comes next. Boy, she really goes through these with a fine-tooth comb. These are not quick and easy summaries. Let me take a look and see the style in which Kyle Cheney did it, and whether there may be any punchier, and whether or not, these are some briefer excerpts from it. Although I recommend Brandy's, and I think I will probably sit down and read this after the show to get the real detail on everything, including what Donald Trump Jr. might have babbled while he was there. Kind of interested about that. But here, let's hit some of the other highlights from Kyle Cheney's Politico report. Transcript tales, notable moments from the January 6th panel interviews. And we'll just jump straight into it. It's the final week he sets things up before the new House GOP majority disbands the January 6th Select Committee, and its members are using it to dump their thousands of pages of raw evidence into the public domain. Oh, and yes, by the way, the House Ways and Means Committee has finally opted to do the same and simply publicly release the tax return information that they finally got from the IRS. So let's see. Politico's team has been wading through the transcripts looking for new details that weren't previously aired during the committee's widely watched public hearings or in its voluminous final report released last week. And here are some of the highlights. This is an interesting place to start. What's this about? The meaning of Ali Akbar. Kimberly Guilfoyle, Donald Trump Jr.'s fiancée, are they not married? Professed ignorance of many of the events around January 6th. She told investigators that she, quote, didn't know all of the ramifications or what the significance was around the January 6th electoral vote counting, and said she still couldn't explain the certifications challenge to this day. It's not hard, but whatever. I guess it's beyond her. Asked whether she knew Ali Akbar. That's the screen name of the weirdo right-wing activist who now goes by Ali Alexander. Asked whether she knew Ali Akbar, another name for Ali Alexander, the far-right organizer of the Stop the Steal movement. She first asked investigators, isn't that what terrorists yell? Before adding, I do not know anyone named Allah Akbar, which is probably not true and a way to avoid answering the question. So some interest in that. Lindsey Graham makes an appearance next. Trump-aligned attorney Christina Bobb recounted a conversation between Rudy Giuliani and Lindsey Graham in which Graham sought out evidence of election fraud. Bob recalled Graham saying in a January 2nd meeting to just give me 5 dead voters. Give me, an example of illegals voting. Just give me a very small snapshot that I can take and champion. Vice President Mike Pence's former aide, Chris Hodgson, also discussed Graham in his interview, noting that the senator was listed on a call log for Pence the day before January 6th, next to the words, express support. Hodgson said he viewed the notation as an indication that Graham had expressed support for Pence's plan to count the electoral votes certified by the states, declaring President Joe Biden the winner. Trump Jr. and the January 6th Meadows texts is the next section here. The Select Committee has long highlighted the urgent texts Trump Jr. sent to the former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows amid the violence of January 6th, worrying that the attack would define his father's legacy and urging a more forceful public response. But the panel never explained why Trump Jr. went through Meadows rather than directly to his father with those concerns. In his interview with the committee, Trump Jr. said the reason was logistical. He was traveling at the time, either en route to an airport or in one, and didn't want to call his father directly. If I was in those areas, I wouldn't want to have a conversation that way, Trump Jr. said. His father, he added, doesn't text or send emails, so reaching him that way wouldn't have been an option. Twitter might have worked, but whatever. Putting the Ray Epps conspiracies to bed. Well, we read plenty about Ray Epps, and I don't think we need to add more to that. New details on Meadows' handling of documents. Politico first broke the news that Cassidy Hutchinson, an aide to Meadows, told the Select Committee her then-boss sometimes burned documents in his office fireplace during the weeks leading up to January 6th, including at times after meeting with Representative Scott Perry. Hutchinson's transcripts offer new details about what she says she witnessed. It wasn't just once, Hutchinson recalled. She saw Meadows burn papers after Perry's visits between 2 and 4 times. Those meetings, she said, were about election issues. Hutchinson also provided a lengthy description of a bizarre episode in which House Intelligence Committee Republican staffers trucked cartloads of documents to the White House and reviewed them in Meadows' office for potential release. The timing and description of this episode tracks closely with Trump's efforts to declassify and expose records related to the FBI's investigation of his campaign's contacts with Russia, which Trump has long derided as a witch hunt. And by the way, I just want to stop for a second to say, if he's burning papers in the White House, I mean, that's just a facial violation of the Presidential Records Act, most likely. And I don't know. To me, it's like you should be entitled to assume in court and to instruct the jury that you can assume the worst about those documents that were being burned. That's the point of this act. The Presidential Records Act has force in this way. It doesn't necessarily have direct punishments built in though in some cases it does if you're just directly involved in destroying the documents. But there should be, and that's fine as far as it goes, but it should also be, a more important, maybe in some ways, to punish people for doing this is to say, when there's a court case about, whatever the underlying issue was that you sought to cover up by destroying the documents, the jury should be entitled to assume the worst about the contents of those documents, as a result of destroying them. And if you think they could be more, helpful in, either acquitting you or mitigating the punishment you could expect to get for the cover-up, then you should be motivated not to destroy them in that way. I think I've kind of, I've clouded the issue a little bit. But what I mean is, if you're being accused of covering up some sort of crime and evidence that you covered it up is that you burned the papers, the jury should be able to basically assume the worst about those papers. If it was anything better for you ultimately than the worst possible thing, then, don't burn the papers, because if you burn them and you get found out for having burned them, then they're going to be able to assume worse things than the papers actually said. It could be a 10-year sentence instead of 5. Just save the papers. Let the act work that magic. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Ad Roots Radio. We'll read a little bit more from Politico's roundup of the transcripts. Let's see, we're still on Cassidy Hutchinson here, who is mentioning, of course, having seen Mark Meadows burn papers in his office. Let's see, did we do this one or not? Hutchinson also provided a lengthy description of a bizarre episode in which House Intelligence Committee Republican staffers trucked cartloads of documents to the White House and reviewed them in Meadows' office for potential release. Okay, that a huge separation of powers type issue. I mean, they can, I guess the members of the legislative branch can opt to, at their discretion, share their papers with the executive branch. It's not that they're prohibited from doing so. But if you are hoping to conduct a clean and independent investigation of corruption in the executive branch, this is not the way to handle it. Okay, let's see. The former Meadows aide, Hutchinson, described the unusual way the document review proceeded, noting that the files were brought to the White House from the Capitol and that Meadows kept the original documents in an office safe, closely guarding them and keeping their origins secret. Eventually, he would produce at least 8 copies of the documents with varying degrees of redaction, intending to supply at least 2 of them to conservative media allies. Hutchinson noted that one set of documents was meant for House GOP leader Kevin McCarthy, but that the California Republican told her he wanted nothing to do with them. She said, based on that conversation, she opted not to offer a set to Senate GOP leader Mitch McConnell. Transcripts also revealed Meadows' Secret Service code name, which was Leverage. I don't know if that's interesting or whether we can make anything out of that. Next up here, 25th Amendment talk. The Select Committee has released transcripts from several members of Trump's cabinet, mostly detailing the days immediately following the attacks on January 6th. Most notable was the interview with former Labor Secretary Eugene Scalia, who discussed efforts to persuade Trump or his allies to convene a cabinet meeting in order to take potential steps to limit Trump's actions in the final days of his administration. Scalia said he had spoken to other cabinet members about what to do in the aftermath of the attack. The panel spoke with, The panel spoke with Elaine Chao, Trump's transportation secretary and wife to McConnell, who resigned immediately after January 6th and took a more muted view of the post-attack discussions. She said she didn't recall her conversations with Scalia, but she agreed that Trump's actions on January 6th contributed to her decision to resign. I wish that he had acted differently, Chao said of Trump. There's no way she doesn't remember the Scalia conversation. Come on. There was little serious consideration of the 25th Amendment, according to the transcripts. Mark Short, Pence's chief of staff, told the panel why any genuine effort would take weeks, well beyond the end of Trump's term, given that the procedure gives the president the chance to appeal. Short said he received a call from Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer to discuss the potential invocation of the 25th Amendment, but he said he refused to connect the call to Pence because Short viewed it as a purely political move. Hutchinson also said she received calls from members of Congress for status updates on discussions invoking the 25th Amendment. Among those who reached out, she said, were Senator Roy Blunt, Kevin McCarthy, Representatives Mark Wayne Mullen and Mike Johnson of Oklahoma and Louisiana, respectively. Johnson's office denied that he brought up the 25th Amendment or talked to Hutchinson during that time period, but that should be easy to establish. Next up, attorney-client relationships. Trump attorney Sidney Powell, who was a link between the president and some of his fringiest outside advisors. She was one of them. It's not a link. She was one of them. Told the select committee that she had attorney-client relationships with 4 members of Congress over election-related matters. The 4 are Representatives Andy Biggs of Arizona, Murdery Trader Green of Georgia, no surprise there, Matt Gaetz of Florida, none there either, and Louis Gohmert of Texas, really 4 of the dumbest, most irritating people in all of Congress. What a shocker. Next up, Trump allies feared local repercussions for declaring themselves true electors. Federal prosecutors are eyeing the decisions of pro-Trump Republican activists in 7 Biden-won states to design certificates that claimed that they were the state's duly qualified presidential electors. That false electors scheme was a central element of Trump's bid to remain in power, but in 2 states, Pennsylvania and New Mexico, the electors insisted that the documents they signed included a caveat. Their status as true electors hinged on whether court rulings affected the outcome of the election. The caveat may have saved them the legal scrutiny that's been applied in other states, and now, thanks to the interview of former Trump campaign official Mike Roman, it's clear why it happened. So good thinking, good lawyering there on their part. Committee staffers read an email from Trump campaign attorney Kenneth Chesebro noting that in a conference call with Pennsylvania's top pro-Trump elector nominees, a concern was raised about the potential for legal exposure if they signed documents without any qualifiers. Chesebro apparently suggested using the caveat in several other states as well, but only New Mexico followed suit. Oh, so it was Chesebro's lawyering. How interesting. But their instinct. That's good. Next up, mundane moments as the Capitol assault began. What's this? The select committee transcripts are littered with personal stories about where witnesses were the moment rioters bashed their way into the Capitol. 2 from Pence's top aides stand out. His chief counsel, Greg Jacob, described being at the Capitol refectory on the first floor of the Senate, grabbing a coffee when a nearby window was smashed by a rioter with a police shield. That turned out to be Dominic Pezzola, a Proud Boy and the very first rioter to breach the building. There was no security that I could see down there, and the glass was shattered just down the hall from where we are, probably 60 feet away, Jacob recalled. Jacob said he quickly tapped out an email to attorney John Eastman, an architect of Trump's last-ditch bid to stay in power, with whom he'd been feuding throughout the day. Jacob told the committee that to get back to Pence, who by then had left the Senate floor, he followed the military aide with the so-called nuclear football, a briefcase with nuclear codes, convinced that she would be permitted to get close to the vice president. Short recalled a similar experience, except he was one floor lower than Jacob, getting lunch from the Senate carryout. You're in line waiting for a cheeseburger when all hell breaks loose, a committee staffer noted during Short's interview. Short said he sprinted back to Pence's location as rioters began to enter the building. I never got my cheeseburger, he noted. That is a mundane moment. Then the most hostile January 6th interview, Representative-elect Max Miller's interview with the January 6th Select Committee was notable, if only for its outright hostility he and his lawyer displayed for the panel. Even other witnesses who had little regard for the committee largely played nice in their interviews, but Miller and his attorney repeatedly derided the panel's investigators, objected to even basic foundational questions, and openly attacked the committee as an illegitimate show rather than a serious probe. And I remind you, he is Representative-elect Max Miller, a Republican of Ohio. So that's fantastic. What sorts of exchanges did they have? Well, let's see. It begins like this. It's a simple question, an unidentified committee interviewer said at one point. After Miller's attorney objected to a question about how often Miller interacted with Trump during the months before January 6th. No one is trying to do a perjury trap. Later, Miller's attorney, Larry Zuckerman, attacked the committee investigator for putting on a show for the congresswoman and the congressman, a reference to Representatives Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, who had dialed into the call. You know, this is all pomp and circumstance here that will eventually lead to nothing, Zuckerman said. Misapplication of the term, but okay. Eventually, the repeated insults provoked Kinzinger to chime in, accusing Miller's attorney of being the one trying to put on a show. He then inadvertently referred to the committee as the prosecution, prompting a sharp response from Miller, who said he viewed Cheney's presence in the interview as trying to intimidate me because I knocked your buddy off the block, a reference to his primary victory over Cheney ally Anthony Gonzalez earlier this year. Wow. Well, okay. Next up, Fuentes was eyed by criminal investigators. Nick Fuentes made headlines when Trump hosted him as a dinner guest in November, but the Select Committee had long eyed him as a figure of interest for the role his Groyper movement played in the attack on the Capitol. Groypers are the followers of the white nationalist Fuentes, and several of them have been charged for playing leading roles on January 6th. Fuentes didn't go into the Capitol, but was outside as rioters clashed with police, and he later described the scene as, quote, awesome. In his February deposition, Fuentes pleaded the Fifth, and his attorney informed the Select Committee that the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C. had labeled him a subject and possibly a target of an ongoing criminal probe. Dan Quayle also making an appearance here. The Conscience, it says. The former vice president was more ubiquitous than previously known in his effort to advise figures around Trump about how to handle his efforts to subvert the election. Quayle notably advised Pence not to attempt to overturn the election results on January 6th, and rather to perform the traditional constitutionally required task of counting electoral votes certified by the states. But in a transcript of Trump National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien's interview, Quayle emerged yet again. He was among the voices, O'Brien noted, telling him not to resign, as Republican mainstays fretted about potential chaos in the closing days of Trump's administration. Next up, drama among the organizers of the January 6th rally. The Select Committee transcripts lay bare the open hostility between different factions of Trump's Stop the Steal allies. Guilfoyle was feuding with GOP fundraiser Caroline Wren. White House advisor Max Miller said Katrina Pearson exaggerated her influence. I just wanted to scroll. Is Max Miller, is that who we were just talking about? Is he the representative-elect? Is it the same Max Miller? Feuding with who? Katrina Pearson. Okay. Pearson advised Trump to keep, quote, psychos off the rally stage, saying he shouldn't give speaking slots to Roger Stone, Alex Jones, and Michael Flynn. That's some lineup, by the way. But just, I mean, in terms of thinking back, like Roger Stone is a jerk, always been a jerk, always regarded as a jerk, but, a source for newspapers. Alex Jones, he is what he is, same thing. Michael Flynn, I mean, in actuality, he's been the same thing all along, but he was National Security Advisor briefly. That's so frightening to think about. Anyway, he's also a spy. You're done for life with me because I won't pay you a $60,000 speaking fee for an event you aren't speaking at. This is the fight between Wren and Guilfoyle. How do you like that? Per Select Committee records. That's effing insane. That's pretty amazing. You remember my longstanding theory was that Trump and Trump family members would demand appearance fees be paid to them from out of the inaugural funds for showing up at their own inauguration. I guess this is one step better. That Kim Guilfoyle wanted a $60,000 fee, an appearance fee, to show up at the Ellipse and to give a speech at the rally. And then I guess she didn't even actually give such a speech maybe, and she still wanted the fee. That's pretty amazing. That you would fight for that is kind of astonishing. But okay. There you go. Deals to shield evidence from DOJ. Let's see what this is about. The January 6th committee indicated in numerous interviews with defendants, some awaiting sentencing for storming the Capitol, that it had agreed not to share any evidence it obtained during its interview with the Justice Department, unless that evidence described additional crimes or the committee suspected perjury. Those promises at least partially explain the panel's fraught relationship with the Justice Department. That became a theme throughout the latter half of its investigation, with the department repeatedly trying to obtain witness transcripts only to be rebuffed by the panel until mid-December. I would like to read a little bit more about that. Lofgren beefs with Tarrio. Let's read about that. When Proud Boys leader Enrique Tarrio submitted to a deposition just weeks before he was charged for his role in the events of January 6th, Representative Zoe Lofgren of California used the moment to pop in for a quick confrontation. She pointed to something called Tarrio's Telegram, in which Tarrio printed a picture of Lofgren with a caption that apparently called her the C word, yow, saying she was blind in one eye. I'm wondering what you meant by that, she asked Tarrio. Tarrio said he didn't recall posting the item. Lofgren then left the deposition as quickly as she arrived. The issue popped up again when a committee staffer squarely asked Tarrio whether he called Lofgren the C word, prompting his lawyer, Dan Hull, to pop in and question the relevance of the questioning. That's a word that's been around since the 1300s in London. It's not a particularly nice word for a lot of people, but you know the history of that word? Committee staffer replied. Unfortunately, I do, Hull said. I don't know how the history of the word is relevant in any way, but whatever. That actually is the end of Kyle Cheney's quick read through the transcripts. Of course, Brandy Buckman taking a much deeper dive into those things, something that I may have to review off the air and see if there's anything that we can pull out and discuss perhaps on Monday and further our knowledge of what the committee uncovered in all of its work. All right, let's see. Other things to share. There are a few others of some considerable interest. Why don't we try... Let's go with this one. This isn't like a really, I mean, I got a choice between a piece over at Daily Kos with Mark Sumner's name on it, which is always intriguing. Very interesting, but I can only do one. I'm going to go the other direction over to HuffPost, which is an unusual choice for me, but I thought this was just an interesting story, given that we had spent a little bit of time talking about earmarks and the interest in or importance of and opposition to allowing members of Congress to earmark appropriation funds for certain local projects. They get a bad name, like lobbyists. There can be good lobbyists, bad lobbyists. Glinda's a good witch, right? The other one is the Wicked Witch of the West. Bad news. You can have both. Here's an interesting story. You don't hear very often of the good side of what earmarks can do, even though there's always somebody willing to tell this story. But here's the headline. It reads this way. Starts with a quote. I bawled, like B-A-W-L-E-D. I cried. I bawled. A congresswoman's 18-month fight for a neglected tribal school just paid off. And it occurs to me, there's going to be a pronunciation issue coming up here, but we'll give it our best. Jennifer Bendry writes this for HuffPost, and here's the story. Buried in the 4,155-page omnibus spending bill, unveiled in the Senate on Tuesday, is a single sentence that's likely to go unnoticed by almost everyone, except the first-term Congresswoman who fought for it with everything she had for the last year and a half. And here's the sentence. For an additional amount for education construction, $90,465,000 to remain available until expended for necessary expenses related to the consequences of flooding at the Tohajili, that's my best attempt at the pronunciation, Tohajili Community School. Okay, that sounds like a lot of money. What's going on? It's the only item in the bill under a section titled Bureau of Indian Education, Education Construction. It's money to rebuild a K-12 school in Tohajili, New Mexico. Tohajili, it's my best guess. A remote community about 35 miles west of Albuquerque. And here's a screenshot of it, but it says what it is. $90 million, though. Like, what's going on? This school was built on a floodplain. That doesn't sound like a great idea. For decades, walls of water have poured down from a nearby canyon and drowned the campus. And it sounds like, this will turn out to be one of those stories that they did it on purpose. Well, we'll build you a school like we're obligated to do, but we'll do it in a way that gets you destroyed with some alarming frequency. I don't know whether that's the case, but it has that feel. But however it happened, it's not good, and you got to do something about it, right? So school officials here routinely pull children from their classes and race to get them onto a bus to shuttle them to safety. That's crazy. Teachers scramble to move their cars to higher ground before they get washed away. The constant flash floods have left the buildings in appalling disrepair. In March, the high school was abruptly vacated and shut down because it was literally sinking into mud and its foundation was crumbling. The walls had visible cracks. Water poured through the roof every time it rained. There was nowhere else for the high school students to go, so they went home, where their teachers somehow carried on teaching virtual classes that previously involved hands-on work in chemistry labs, culinary arts classes, and in woodworking classrooms. So, the pandemic times 10 here. The Tohajili Community School, has been neglected and massively underfunded, and maybe the community has too, since its founding. It's one of 183 K-12 schools overseen by the Bureau of Indian Education, responsible for providing education to more than 48,000 Native American children around the country. Of these schools, 86 are in, quote, poor condition, and 73 don't have the money for needed repairs, according to BIE, Bureau of Indian Education, data from 2021. An additional 41 of these schools are in fair condition. The school isn't just substandard. It's a site that carries historical trauma. Like many of today's BIE schools, the Tohajili Community School is also a former Indian boarding school. For about 150 years, the U.S. government forced tens of thousands of indigenous children to attend these schools to try to assimilate them into white culture. As a result, these kids endured physical, psychological, and sexual abuse. Some died, others disappeared. Despite having such few resources, the Tohajili Community School has still managed to thrive culturally, says Representative Melanie Stansbury, the Democratic representative from New Mexico who represents this district and who's the subject of the story, I guess. School officials have reclaimed the space and built a strong community around it, grounding its activities in indigenous language and cultural revitalization. Stansbury has made it her number one priority to find money for the school ever since she won a special election in June of 2021 to fill the House seat vacated by now Interior Secretary Deb Haaland. And if anyone knows how the congressional appropriations process works, it's Stansbury. The lawmaker previously worked on BIE's budget at the Office of Management and Budget and was a staffer on the Senate Committee on Energy and Natural Resources. For the last 18 months, Stansbury has been aggressively, if desperately, lobbying anyone who has a say in tribal school funding. House appropriators, congressional leadership, White House officials, Interior Department officials to fund the Tohajli Community School adequately. Seems like a steep road. But she did have the background, and I'm sure she promised in campaigning for this thing, look, I have the know-how that it takes to get something like this done, and that's all she worked on until she got it done. This is kind of amazing. Over the past few weeks, as lawmakers scrambled to get their priorities into the $1.7 trillion year-end spending bill, Stansbury said she spent every day, all day long, dogging House and Senate appropriators, Hill leaders, and administration officials to include money for the school. She didn't know until Tuesday morning when the bill was publicly released and she pored over its text that her efforts had paid off. It's amazing that that's the only thing you need. But then you got to leverage it, right, politically. And you say, listen, I won in a special election. It's a rough year. We're going to want to hold this seat. I ran on delivering on this promise, and if I can't do it, if you won't help me do it, I got real problems trying to defend this seat later on. Well, she goes on to say, we've been working so hard on this for so long. I literally woke up and bawled my eyes out, Stansbury told HuffPost in an emotional interview on Tuesday. I invested everything I had to get funding for this school. And it's not for her, it's for the school, right? The Tohajli community is only a short distance from Albuquerque, but the people out there have so much need, and the community hasn't had its needs and priorities met. It's just so huge for this community. Even if I accomplish nothing else in my time serving in Congress, she added, this is the most important thing I could ever have imagined that we could get into the budget. Tohajli school officials have already been authorized to rebuild their school on another site above the floodplain. That's good news. That means as soon as the omnibus bill is signed into law, school leaders can immediately move forward with the architectural design and construction for the new facility. The Senate passed the bill on Thursday. It now heads to the House. This is the greatest news in a long time for the people of Tohajli, a new school. Nora Morris, Vice President of the Tohajli Navajo chapter, said in a statement, thank you so much on behalf of our children, as we know they will be very excited and happy, as we all prayed for our children to be safe and warm in standardized buildings. Willinda Castillo, the school's chief administrator, said she's been looking forward to this day for years. Within the past 4 years, the local Tohajli Community School Board and administration team have been voicing our flooding and structural facility concerns. It's pretty dry language, but okay. We now can say our voices have been heard, she said in a statement. Our instructional staff will now be able to teach without worrying about flood issues. Our students will now be able to focus on their academics with no interruption of school closure due to their school getting flooded. Asked why this one school's success was such a priority among other issues in her district, Stansbury said it's a victory for the school, but it's about something bigger, too. It's about tribes being able to chart a new path for tribal education. This is an opportunity for this community that's been ignored for so long across the board to create a state-of-the-art school to provide an education to children for generations. That is really, truly reflective of the culture and language and community values of the Tohajli community, she said. This has been happening across tribal communities. And I guess another good piece of news for this is that finally the Bureau of Indian Education actually maybe lives up to the promise of providing education, bringing a state-of-the-art education to Native American communities, not for the purpose of assimilating them, but for the purpose of actually educating the children there, both in their own culture and giving them the ability to code switch when necessary, and if they want to venture out into the wider world, to be skilled enough in getting along to do so. But I imagine originally the Bureau of Indian Education, the stuffed shirts who established it, even though they had wrong-headed and insane ideas about assimilation, probably thought, we're going to be providing state-of-the-art education to these these savages, they probably thought. And then they were probably countermanded by others who said, yeah, why spend any money on that? You should give them substandard crap and save the money for white kids. Anyway, it's just a really interesting story about the other side of earmarks and how, things that get derided as, oh, well, bringing home the bacon, bribing people so that you can get reelected versus, look, this is the highest priority for an underserved community in this district, and I dedicated everything I had to it. And yes, it will probably get me reelected. And yeah, it's supposed to get me reelected, but it's not an evil in itself. And the idea of getting rid of earmarks because they'll somehow eliminate the possibility that interested politicians will steer money in certain ways so they can guarantee their reelection is probably a pipe dream. You can forget about it. You might as well be above board about these things and occasionally get a story like this one. So I thought that would make an interesting story to use to end the day, the week, the year, and we've done it, regardless of what you may have thought about that. All right. Well, there we go. We're on our way out for the weekend. I hope you'll have a great one and enjoy and have a safe New Year's celebration as well. We'll see you in the new year with Greg Dworkin and his roundup of what happened, whether it's an entire year or just what happened over the weekend. We'll find out. Oh, I see Greta Thunberg is out there using Mastodon, I guess, as well to let people know. Oh, I'm sorry. This is just one of those bots that retweets saying this is what happens when you don't recycle your pizza boxes. So I guess just getting in on the joke. But, you have to be schooled in the fiction in order to understand the memes. And by the way, you can't recycle most pizza boxes anyway. They're too grease-stained, and they won't let you do it, at least not around our area. Anyway, stay tuned now, of course, for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, the last installment of their year as well. Justice Putnam brings you his collection of stories, including the threat of mass resignations from the Intel community upended Trump's coup plans. More, I guess, discoveries from the transcripts released by the January 6th committee. What else have we got? Well, I'll sneak in one or two after this short message.
From netrootsradio.com, you have been listening to Kagro in the morning with David Waldman.
Oh, this looks interesting. An Idaho school board won't say what are the racist incidents it is investigating at its middle and high schools, and I happen to know that that's something you can get thrown out of office for because you have to listen to parents and be open about what happens in your schools, and I'm sure the Republicans are going to come crashing down on this like a ton of bricks sometime soon.